Hi, I'm Ross and I renovate homes for living. Join me in the next half an hour while we renovate this bedroom. So the first thing is we got to move that light to a central position on the ceiling here. And we've got some extra sockets here and there. One on this side as well. Move that light to a central position there. Get rid of this bedroom basin, and we need to put a chest of drawers in its place up to about this height. Then get rid of this radiator, put a designer toe radiator on the side here. Replaster the ceiling to a flat finish so you can get rid of that old ugly Artex. New wardrobes on this side. Well, we made some handles for them, they're pretty cool, you'll see them in a second. Redecorate the whole room. New flooring, new skirting boards and architraves. Hope you enjoy it. So in the previous videos I've been talking about flat packing, and here's a good example of what flat packing actually means. Because this bedroom was on the second floor, those wardrobes had to be carried upstairs, so I've decided to make everything in pieces, bring it upstairs and assemble it upstairs. So you can see me trimming all the sheet material here and then piling up the pieces on the side here while I'm doing the calculation. Once you have the designs and drawings, it's not that difficult to do. Just makes it easier to bring it upstairs and just assemble it on site. And then we make the handles here. So on this particular project I've decided to handmade the handles. It was an inspiration I found on the internet. Quite a simple but wardrobe with flat doors, painted white, and big wooden handles. Now I didn't want to spend time trying to find out if I can get those handles somewhere, because I can make them myself. It's not that difficult, as you can see here. Just milling some ash. I wanted to use ash on the white doors because ash is a very light colored wood and it just looks nice with the white. Just contrasted enough to give it that smart and contemporary look, but not overpower it. So this is I don't think this is the first one, I'm gonna be honest with you. I think I've made one or two before I filmed the video, but the first handle is the most difficult to make because you got to figure out all those angles and how you're gonna do that. I was trying to use more power tools than anything else, mainly because handles are not that big, and if you use power tools, it's a possibility you can lose a finger. Now, I hope you understand why I didn't want to do that. But yeah, that's why I was trying to use more hand tools. I did use a multi-cutter to cut most of the handle, which I didn't film for some reason, or it was smoking too much. Yeah, it was one of those things where you get the dust inside the crack and it was just smoking way too much. You couldn't get really nice shots. And here I'm cutting that weird angle. I'm cutting it before the line because I was thinking of going with the hand plane and just plane it to size, which is exactly what I'm doing here. That way you can get a really nice finish. Just break the edge with my little block plane. The inside of the handle is a bit of a difficult one to clean, so I'll use a Stanley knife. Sometimes you got to improvise with things like that. It's there's not really a way to do that. Maybe a spoke shave. I'm willing to give it a try next time. I don't really have a spoke shave. I need to get one of those. Then cleaning up with the 80 grit sandpaper. Here I like to keep my sander set up with an 80 grit because if you're rough sanding stuff, 80 grit is just perfect for removing a lot of material. And on these ones I wanted to round over a couple of the edges, so it made perfect sense. You can see them here. I'm just finishing here with a little bit of sandpaper, and that's what the handles look like before they were oiled up. Now we're doing a complementary pulls on the chest of drawers. Now these ones are integrated pulls, which it took me a while to figure out how to make. So for the pull itself, we've got a special router bit. I got this one on Amazon. It's not that difficult to get, but it's specifically designed for pulls. Then we've got to flip the piece and then route the recess for the plate where we'd actually put that American ash plate, so we can have a complementary handle to the ones on the wardrobes. And this is what the plate looks like. It's obviously oversized. I'll tell you in a second why I left it like that. So here's me actually making the plates. I'm going on the jointer, just making sure that it's all flat. This is a bit of a sketchy cut, so I would not recommend you do that, but you know, be careful. I'm very, very stupid, and I'm also very expendable, so sometimes I do sketchy stuff like that. And here we basically have the plates. And we've got to cut them to size on the miter saw. Now when you round it, you end up with those round over, so you can actually square them with a chisel, or you can round over the plate. I've decided to round over the plate. Personal choice, you can do either of those. Then CA glue it. You can use PVA, it'd be fine too, but I like the CA glue because it just sets quickly. Here's the thing about leaving the plate oversized. My thicknesser is broken. The belt on my thicknesser is broken, and this is a too small of a strip, so I'm not gonna put that through the joint. It will get way too many vibrations, and I can easily lose a finger, so I wasn't gonna do that. I thought it's a stupid idea, so I've decided to plane it with my number 4 smoothing plane and then sand it to size, which inevitably ruins the paint on the back, but that's an easy fix. You can touch it up. That brings me to another one. You've got to paint the MDF before you install the plates. Otherwise, on the front here, you'd never be able to get into that recess. So that's why we paint the fronts, and then we put the plates. The backs, as I said, I can touch them up on site. I'm just oiling up the timber. And here we get to actually assemble the wardrobes. You can see here why I've decided to flat pack everything and just bring it upstairs and then assemble it, because those boxes would have been a nightmare to maneuver around the stairs. Not to mention, I don't think 2 of them would fit in my van if they're assembled. Obviously, as flat packed, I can fit 4. So on this side we have 2 boxes. I believe they're 900 millimeters wide each, and then in here you can actually see why I like using plywood in cabinet making. You see that beautiful grain? This is I can assure you no other wardrobe would have exactly the same grain, because this is actual real wood. Unlike that printed stuff on the melamine, this comes from real timber, so no other wardrobe would have exactly the same print. So it's quite a neat feature. And then we get to installing the doors. So I've pre-drilled the holes. So those are 35 millimeter holes for the hinges. I've pre-drilled them in the workshop, and all I need to do now is install the hinges, which is a very simple thing to do. As you can see here on the close-up, put the hinge, put the square, so we make sure that we're square, mark the position of the screws, drill a couple of pilot holes, and then screw it in place. That's as simple as that. We put 4 hinges on each door. Those are quite big doors. I think 4 is just right there. On those size doors, I would put definitely more than 2 or 3. I don't think 3 is enough, so I would put 4. I also try and make sure that they're equally spaced so it looks aesthetically pleasing. The way I hang these doors, it's in my opinion, this is the easiest way. So I would measure the top and the bottom plate, because that's quite easy. The center of my top and bottom plate is 100 mil. So I would measure and mark the top and bottom plate, and then what I would do is I would hang the door on just those 2 hinges, which for the moment, for a short period of time, is absolutely fine. And then as the door is hanging on those 2 hinges, I can easily mark the position of my middle hinges instead of me trying to go through the process of measuring. And I just use the door as a template. You can see me here hanging the top and then the bottom, and then I would just screw the 2 middle hinges. It's quite an easy one. there's actually a close-up in the next shot where you can actually see how exactly I'm doing that. But yeah, I do that with all the tall doors. It's just an easier way. And you can see here, just flip the hinge with the plate on. That plate is removable, but on those two middle hinges, there's no really a point of removing them. So I just flip the hinge, drill my pilot hose, and just screw it in place. The top and bottom, I do remove the plate because it's easier to mount the plate and then hang the door that way. There's a little clip on the back here, which it allows you to take the door off if you want to do that. So yeah, that's how I do the middle hinges. And now the beauty of those hinges is they allow you to adjust your doors in 4 different directions. You can go back and forth and side to side and in and out. So that's what I spent some time doing. And we get to installing those handles. Now this is a tricky bit because I've made those handles. It means that I need to drill the holes. I was using screws for those. I was contemplating using threaded inserts, but then I thought this is going to be too big of a pain. But the problem with, well, it's not really a problem, but it could give you a little bit of a headache, is you need to make sure all of your holes are identical, because otherwise the door handles won't be aligning, and that's something you don't want to do. So yeah, I'd spend a lot of time thinking how am I gonna measure and mark the position of the holes so we can have aligning door handles. So once that was done, I had to do the trim. That's pretty simple. Just measure up, allow some space for the gap between the door and the trim, which I think it was 3 millimeters on that one. So we cut those ones and then install them with a nail gun. Now the next part is quite interesting, so watch and learn, because I'm going to teach you something that will take you about a year in college to learn. So what we have to do here is replaster that ceiling. The first thing we need to do is we need to scrape off any of the pointy bits that would come off. I'm using a taping knife, which is kind of like a big spatula, and the point of that is, as I said to you, we need to get some of the pointy bits off. Not all of them would come off, but as much as we can get out, it's always helpful. Then we need to prime the ceiling. I like using PVA. I've been using PVA for years, and I know this is a bit of a controversial topic because some plasters are really into using that blue grit or whatever fancy primer it's fashionable nowadays. I have been using PVA for years and it's just been working fine for me, so I'm still doing that. Then we got to fix those holes that electricians have made in order to chase their cables. So I'm using those plasterboard patches. They're quite nice, they're self-adhesive. They were having trouble sticking on that PVA. The PVA has kind of a sheen on it, so it's, yeah, they were kind of difficult to stick on it, so that's why I'm stapling them. It's a fantastic way of making sure they're not coming down. And then there's a couple of bits on the ceiling that we need to fix with bonding, and I'm also mixing bonding because I need to fill the chasing of some of the chases of the electricians where they've moved the sockets. So bonding is an undercoat plaster, fantastic for filling chasings and any mixture of backgrounds. So on that ceiling, this is what we had to level out because it was pointing down slightly, and I wanted to use bonding to feather it a little bit. And once the bonding's done, we go over to the multi-finish, which is a finishing plaster, as the name implies. We got a mix. I think that was 3/4 of a bag, something like that. Now this is a job easier done with a laborer or someone helping you, because one can be mixing and the other one can be pouring from a bag, but I was on my own. And that's how I did it. Now you got to get a nice and creamy consistency here. I think here I've made it a little bit too thick, so I have added a little bit of water at a later stage. You don't want it too thick. It's kind of kind of hard on your shoulder. If it's too thick, you have to push with your shoulder too much, and doing a ceiling means that you just destroying your shoulder. Also, the finish is not going to be as good. Then we apply the first coat. The first coat, we gotta put it on thick. It's especially on an Artex, it takes a lot of material. The way I usually calculate how much plaster to mix is I would calculate how many square meters the ceiling is, and I would put that many liters of water. So on this one was about 11 square meters of a ceiling, and I put about 11 liters of water. So and I make it slightly thicker. The second coat we make it thinner. So once we apply the first coat, we go over a couple of times, but I'll spare you. I won't show you all the whole thing, but we go over and we flatten it. So we're trying to get rid of any trowel marks, trying to get a nice and flat surface. Again, that was done a couple of times. I just didn't want to film the whole process because it would just take forever, and it's not that different than the first flattening. And then what we're doing here is applying the second coat. The second coat, I make it slightly thinner, because if our first coat is has covered well, our second coat is just so we can make sure that we get a nice finish on the ceiling. So the process is exactly the same. We apply it and then we're flattening it, and this is a different angle of the flattening, so you can actually see how we slowly getting rid of those lines and making sure that we have a nice and flat finish. Now that process needs to be repeated 2, maybe 3 times. It really depends on the setting of the plaster. It's not really an exact science, but I wasn't gonna film the whole thing because it's exactly the same, just done a few more times. But if that's what you want to see, let me know. I will do a whole video on some of my later projects. And then as we're going along, I'm using a soft bristle brush so I can clean the edges, and then slowly pushing it in. As this particular plaster, it gets, so within about 20 minutes of application, it starts to get harder and harder, so you can start pushing in, and eventually we are going to polish it and finish it with what it's called a finishing trowel or flexi trowel, and that's the one I'm talking about. This is the Marshalltown Permaflex, which is a very thin finishing trowel. It gives you a fantastic finish on plasters such as that British Gypsum multi-finish. So we gotta make sure that the trowel's wet, and then we run it along, and as you can see here, we're getting a very good finish. And that's what the plastered ceiling looks like. It takes a couple of days to dry. So while the plaster's drying, we can actually start painting the doors. So these are the doors of the wardrobe. I purposely did not paint them before we plastered the ceiling, because I knew that I'm gonna get some splashes of plaster on them. So a lot of people over the years have been asking me about painting MDF, because they see some of the stuff I built out of MDF, and when I paint them, they look so nice, and people are like, oh, how do you get such a nice finish? Which is not that difficult. MDF is a wonderful material. It does get some bad rep for, I don't know for what reason, but if you know how to prepare MDF and paint it properly, it's a beautiful material. So every time someone asks me how to do it, I just say the same thing. You gotta do 2 undercoats and 2 top coats, and then you sand them in the middle, in between the coats. So this is what I'm doing here. In between the coats, I would sand them, and then you're looking at about 4 coats. So on this particular one, we're doing white, which it means white undercoat and white paint. So we do 2 undercoats, sand them in between the undercoats, and then 2 top coats. Now ideally, I would, in between the coats, we would start sanding them at 120, and then maybe towards the end we go to 240. So we progressively go with finer and finer sandpaper. So once this was all done, we had to start working on the floor. So the first thing I do, especially in this house, because we've been having terrible problems with squeaky floorboards, is we put 9mm backing onto the floorboards, which greatly reduces the squeaks of the old floorboards. And also we're using vinyl clicking flooring, so this provides a flat surface for the vinyl, so it's kind of a two birds with one stone. But the difference that it makes when it comes to the squeaks and sorting them out, it's just absolutely fantastic. So that was all done, and then we can paint some stuff. So this is the proper way of priming that new plaster. So we put some paint and then we thin it down with water, and the reason we do that is because that new plaster is a very high suction background, so we don't want to use paint because it's just going to suck the moisture out of the paint, and then it will put a really thick coat which eventually is going to crack and peel. What we want to do is we want to put a very thin coat that soaks into the plaster and provides a better good surface for our finished paint. So this is exactly what we're doing here. You want to thin down that paint to about 50-50. I say about because it's not an exact science, so you know, maybe you'd put a couple of liters of paint and a couple of liters of water, and then go over with it, and then after that you can just paint over it. So we've done the painting on the ceiling, and then we're painting the walls. I'm doing it before I install the floors for a reason, because my idea here was to put 2 coats on the walls before the floors have been installed. Therefore I didn't have to cover the floors, and then once the floors have been installed, I would go over and just do general snagging, make sure that everything, you know, if I've damaged something I can touch it up, which I did, by the way. Spoiler alert, when I was installing the door I lifted it a bit too much and smacked the ceiling. So I'm doing the door now, and as I'm watching the video and doing the voiceover, I realize that I've installed the door before I painted the wall, so it's kind of in the wrong order, but please excuse my ignorance, I'm a moron. Anyways, let's install that door. So this is an oak veneer door. So the first thing we need to do is we need to measure up and trim the bottom. So I've done that already. I've allowed 10mm because we were going to raise the floor by 6, approximately 6, so that would leave about 4mm of gap, which based on my calculations should have been fine. Sorry. And then it was, yes. I'm just as surprised as you are. So we cutting the bottom here, doing a couple of passes. We don't want to put too much strain on that, so try and get it all done in one pass. Here's a little tip here for you. If you put those spaces and you put the door on top of them, that would allow you to mark the hinge position. So there was previously a door over there, and I'm using the top and bottom hinge position as the same. However, this is a very heavy door, so I'm putting a 3rd hinge in the middle. It's necessary. Whenever you have a heavy door, I would always recommend having a 3rd hinge. I had to shave off a little bit of the top of the door here. So with those old door frames, very rarely that you'd get them where they're perfectly straight and square. However, this one wasn't that bad. I've actually seen a lot worse, but even with that one, I still had to take a little bit off that side, and then we get to put the hinges in. So the easiest way to put hinges on an internal door is to have a router set up like this, where you have the parallel fence set up to the width of the hinge, and then you just use a chisel to square it to size. You can do the whole thing with a chisel, but it's much easier with a router, especially on an oak door. So we do that. When we drill the holes, I like to go off center towards the back. It just pulls the hinge into that recess, giving it a little bit of a tighter fit, which is quite nice at the end. Then on the top and the bottom hinge position, which we've already had on the door frame here, I've had to make a slight adjustment. It was nothing too bad, but as I said, they were already there, so I wanted to use them. Also, they're the same size as the hinge, and then the same positioning as the rest of the door, so it made sense. And this is the middle, which we've had to add. The previous door was just a hollow MDF door, which only required 2 hinges. This one, again, it's an oak veneer, quite a heavy door. I believe it was 28 kilograms. So adding a third hinge is not only advisable, but it's a must. So we're putting a recess here, just doing it with the chisel, and then after that, it's on to hanging the door. Now, that's a lot of fun when I'm doing them on my own, because I'd have to hold the door while holding the screws and while holding my impact driver in between my legs, if you can see here. And not impossible, kind of easier if you have 2 people. Maybe one of those days I'm gonna get a laborer, but yeah, don't count on that. And make sure the door closes fine. We're happy with it. And then after that, we got to do the flooring. So here's what I like to do when I'm doing flooring. I would lay it like that so I can see, if I start with a full piece, what am I going to end up with. You can calculate that. It's not that difficult. You just use the width of the room and then divide it by the width of your planks, and then that will give you an approximation. I just like the visual aspect of laying it and actually seeing. So in this particular instance, I was starting with a full piece and I was ending up with about 3/4 of a piece at the end. So I was happy with that. What you don't want to end up with is a too thin strip at the end, because those could be a nightmare. But let me actually teach you how to install that vinyl floor. So we start with the most awkward piece, where we have to go around this radiator pipe. So we mark the position here, and then we carry it with the combination square. After that, we can drill the hole for the pipe. And the thing about the vinyl floors is that it's flexible enough to allow us to be able to cut the back, snap it like this, and allow us to push it through the pipe like so. And this could be barely seen on the back. Then after that, we can continue with the row, installing it. Now this is supposed to be done with a rubber mallet, but I could not find mine, so I was bashing it with my fist. It's just as good. We're doing the whole row as per the manufacturer recommendation. The last piece, we flip it over to mark the position, cut it on the miter saw, and then we install it. By the way, that vinyl floor is an absolute killer for blades. Now, this is my Evolution miter saw, and the blade I'm using is a multi-material blade, which is rated for steel and aluminium and all sorts of metals and whatnot. If you do a couple of rooms this size of vinyl flooring, you'd probably have to replace the blade after that. That's how much damage it does on your blade. However, it's worth when it comes to how quickly it is. So it's worth replacing every once in a while, just for the sake of the speed in terms of installation. Now, another thing when it comes to those vinyl floors is some of them require underlay, some of them don't. Now, this particular one did require underlay, and it's the 2mm underlay that we're using here as per the specs. So before you start installing, you really need to read the manufacturer's recommendations. And then when we get to the end here, here's a little trick here. Get yourself one of those reverse hammer sort of things, where you can use it to tap your end piece in place. And when the flooring is done, we can go ahead and trim out the whole room. So we start by cutting a bevel here, putting some grip fill, and nailing the board in place. The bevel is there for a reason, because that's how we join 2 boards together when one is not long enough to cover the whole wall. So a second piece, we need to cut a corresponding bevel which would overlap the previous board. Then that would allow us to nail both boards together. and then we need to cope the other end where we have an internal corner. So I like to do my coping with a router. Now there's a few different ways you can do that. You can use coping saw, you can use a jigsaw. I've seen people using an angle grinder with a sanding disc. I just like using router. Then I finished it off with my coping saw here just to get in that internal corner, but majority of the material removed with a router. And this is how the internal corner works. Unfortunately, I lost the rest of the footage, so we're going straight on to me doing external corner. And basically what we're doing here is we have the pieces cut up, and then we glue them with the CA glue. That way we can have a beautiful external corner, and then we go ahead and then we put some grip fill and then nail it in place. Oh, in a second you'll actually see what the previous joint looks like. Sadly, I pressed the wrong button. Well, again, that's not news, but I'm an idiot. So don't worry about it. You'll actually see what the joint looks like when it comes to painting it. But in the meantime, I'm doing the architrave, which was as awkward as it can get, because we have so in this house we've had an old heating system with air vents. I'm not sure what that one's called. It was very popular in the 1960s and 70s in the UK. So if you know what it's called, let me know in the comments. I can probably Google it. But so anyways, you can see that boxing above the door. That's where the old air vents would run, and that's a massive nightmare for the architrave, because the architrave is wider than the space that we have there. So I had to trim it to size, and it was just annoying. It wasn't. Yeah, I would have preferred if I didn't have to deal with that, because it's not. It was annoying me. I was gonna say I wasn't particularly happy with it. I don't know if there was a better way for me to tackle it. You'd actually see it as a close-up shot in a second here, how it looks. And I'm putting a little piece on that mitre there, just so I can join it. I'm still not particularly happy with how this looks. However, without me destroying that boxing, which it's not economically viable, I don't know if there was a better way. So here we're back to that joint I was telling you about. So the skirting board has been installed, filled, and we're sanding it. So this is what it looks like. Sanded the nail heads where we filled them, and then we're painting it. Now the paint I'm using here is eggshell, and it's exactly the same color as the rest of the walls, and actually the ceiling. The whole room is painted in that color. It's called White Mist from Dulux. It's quite a nice off-white color. So the customer decided to use that on every single surface in that room. We go ahead and paint the rest of the woodwork here. I'm not going to bore you to death with looking at me painting skirting boards, so I'm just going to do a couple of shots so you can actually see what I'm talking about. But other than that, there's no need to cover the whole painting process of the skirting boards. And this is what our finished room looks like. Now we've got the flooring, we've got the tall radiator here on this side. We've got the chest of drawers, the big wardrobes, that oak door. So as we've almost finished, I'd like to give credit to the people who have watched this video to the end by telling you what the cost of this project was. So the end price to our customer, including materials and everything, was just under £8,000. I would really like to know whether you think this is expensive, cheap, or reasonably priced. Let me know down in the comments, but I would ask you not to put the price. That way I would know that anyone who's commented on that video has actually watched it to the end. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.